Alright, I've been using this same i7 6700K in my main rig for the last 18 months. And in that time, I've seen my maximum temperature under load jump up from 84 degrees Celsius when I first set up the system at a 4.6 gigahertz overclock to now getting up into the mid 90s from time to time. So that's obviously an issue. So I'm going to bring up Prime 95 here, which is how I originally tested the system for stability with the overclock. And we're going to go ahead and run a blend test, which is under torture tests. And that's how I tested it previously. And immediately we see it jump to 84, 85, 86 on certain cores. And since this is a liquid cooler, as we wait, the temperatures will likely go up. Now I have replaced the thermal interface material or thermal paste between the cold plate on the liquid cooler and the integrated heat spreader with delid. Because I noticed these temperature increases, and so far I have not seen much of a difference. So as we can see here, we're definitely above the 84 degrees that I had hit as a maximum when I set the system up. We're up to 95 now on core 2, which is far too hot. We're up to 90 on core 0. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop this test. And all the cores were reaching for the 90s if they didn't hit the 90s. So we got 90, 87, 95, and 89. And we'd like to keep things at 85 or below. So obviously there's an issue here. The most likely issue is the thermal interface material or thermal paste that Intel uses between the CPU die and the integrated heat spreader. Now, it's a pretty well-known issue in the community that Intel uses a poor thermal interface material, oftentimes doesn't use a very good amount of it or doesn't apply it properly. And also has an issue of it migrating out from between the die and the heat spreader. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and delid this CPU or remove the integrated heat spreader so that we can clean that off and replace it with some liquid metal thermal interface material from Cool Laboratories, which is Liquid Ultra, and that hopefully will bring our temperatures down significantly. So without any further ado, let's get to that. Alright, so getting to the CPU is pretty straightforward with this setup. This is a Cooler Master all-in-one liquid cooler. So we're going to go ahead and pull the lead for the pump off the header. And then we're going to go ahead and remove these screws, loosen them up in a cross pattern. Alright, the mounting screw should be all loose now. Let me take a look here. Maybe not quite. Alright. And there we go. we're down to the CPU, and that is delid that's on there, and it's actually still in decent shape. I put it on there, I don't know, maybe a month ago. Alright, so next, super easy, we're just going to pop this guy out over. It's going to pop this up and pull this out along with the carrier. And there's our i7-6700. I'm going to clean it off and I'll be back. Alright, so here we have the i7-6700K. It's cleaned off. I got all the delid off of the IHS. And I do not have a tool to delid, so I'm going to use the old razor blade method. This is a nice new blade. Alright, so we're going to take this guy, and I'm looking for whichever corner looks like it's going to be easiest to get into. It looks like maybe this corner. So there's some adhesive here between the IHS and the PCB. And you want to be real slow and real careful because you don't want to cut into the printed circuit board. So got this corner started. Good. So I should be able to run the blade down the edge here, and if I'm careful I won't cut the PCB. Try and keep the blade flat. And we want to go slow. Don't cut in too deep, because if you do, you might nick the core, or the might damage the PCB or the cores if you cut in too deeply. And always try and keep the blade flat so it doesn't cut into the PCB. If it cuts into the PCB, printed circuit board, we could have lots of problems such as RAM not registering, the whole CPU being toast, no post. Could end up with a RAM channel dead, could end up with bad PCIe lanes. So try not to cut into the printed circuit board or into the die. So that's why we're trying to keep the blade fairly close to the edge here of the IHS to keep from cutting into the die. And that should be it. Let's take a look here. Pop this guy off. And there is our delidded i7-6700K. And we can see here that, like I thought, we've got some thermal paste that has moved out to the sides. We don't have very much coverage here on this side, on this end of the core, or of the silicon. So, or actually, I guess it was this way. But yeah, there's not very good adhesion there. So this stuff here, yeah, it's real dry and flaky. It just comes right off with my finger here. I don't even have to get any alcohol or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up this PCB, clean off the sealant that they have around here, which seems to be room temperature vulcanizing silicon. And then we'll go ahead and replace it with some Cool Laboratories Liquid Ultra. Alright, so I got the PCB and the heat spreader cleaned up. Here's the heat spreader. Hopefully you can see it's nicely cleaned up. And I've cleaned the center of it. The PCB is in its holder. This particular board has a plastic holder for the PCB to sit in, and that keeps all the pins lined up so that the CPU doesn't float in the socket. So what we're going to do now is apply the Cool Laboratories Liquid Ultra, which is a metal style of thermal paste. It is multiple metals. I think gallium is the primary metal. So the instructions say to put down a blob and then to use a brush that is included to spread it. And it's actually more viscous than I had expected, but it also does not want to adhere to the CPU die as most pastes would. Alright, there we go. We got a nice little blob on there. And I'm going to use one of the included brushes to spread it. Now this is conductive. You don't want to use an excessive amount, but there is a little bit of sealant between the die, the CPU die, and the substrate or PCB, printed circuit board. This is much more viscous than I expected. That's fine though. So it's spreading nicely on the die here. I think I may have used a little too much, so I'm going to wipe a little bit more away. It does say not to use an overabundance, although the instructions are translated from, I believe, German, and aren't the best translation. So that's alright. They get the point across anyway. Alright, so it is at the edges of the die there, and we've scooped up any excess, it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and put the heat spreader down. And now I have to kind of visually ensure that it's halfway between the two, because when I come down I want even pressure on both sides here. And there has been some talk in the past that you have to hold the heat spreader in place. So put my finger down there. And there we go. That is a little bit crooked. Let's fix that real quick. They say not to rotate, but to just put downward pressure, but it moves pretty easily. So let's do that once more. All right, great. There's a little bit of delid left from before that was on that bracket. All right, so we have a floating, relidded i7 6700K, and now I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the cold plate and pump for the liquid cooler and use delid to do that, and then I will go ahead and retest in Prime 95 and see what our temperatures are. Hopefully they will be much lower. Okay, I'm back, and I've been using the CPU for about 3 days now with the Cool Laboratories Liquid Ultra in place of the stock Intel thermal interface material between the die and the integrated heat spreader. And I've set things back to 4.6 gigahertz. I have been able to run a fairly consistent 4.8 gigahertz overclock since replacing the thermal interface material. But to show the difference in temperatures, I've set everything back to what it was before I did the delidding. And we're going to go ahead and run a torture test here in Prime 95 to see the difference. Now, if I remember correctly, prior to delidding, immediately upon starting Prime 95, we would jump up to the low 80s. And as you can see here, we're jumping up to 68, 65, 65, 69 now. That was 68 a second ago. So obviously the initial jump in temperature is not so large. And we're going to go ahead and let this heat soak. Since this is a liquid cooler, it is going to take a little bit of time to heat up to full temperature. But you can already see a difference between the way that the cores are heating up now with the liquid metal thermal interface material as opposed to the old stock Intel stuff. We're getting much better temperatures. And really, at the same overclock, I'm getting much better temperatures than I did when the CPU was new. So even back then, I was looking at 84 degrees for a maximum, and I don't think we're going to actually hit that at 4.6 gigahertz with these settings, because right now we're only up to 71 max on 3 cores. So we could let this run for a long time, but obviously the temperature is very much different in terms of how it's acting than it did prior to the delidding. So I'm going to say, as others have, that Intel's thermal paste and their application of that thermal paste is not up to par with what it should be, especially on something like an i7 6700K, which is supposed to be an enthusiast chip. It is the K chip, which means that the multiplier is unlocked for easier overclocking. They should be, in my opinion, they should be soldering the IHS to the die like AMD is doing. And like Intel has done long in the past. But there's our results. I think this is heat soaked just about as long as we were heat soaking prior to the delid, and we can see we reached a maximum of 77 on core 3, but that probably was only for a moment. Anyway, I hope this video has helped you out and you found it informative. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, like the video, and consider subscribing for more content in the future. Thanks for watching.